The city of Hamburg was burning like hell on earth. High explosive bombs tore through buildings, while firestorms turned streets into molten rivers. People trapped in the inferno had their feet stuck in melting asphalt, screaming for their lives. No one could have imagined in 1939 that such destruction could happen to a once peaceful, prosperous city. Today we'll explore how the German public reacted to war from 1939 to 1945, why ordinary Germans didn't resist Hitler or his catastrophic decisions, how propaganda shaped daily life and perceptions of victory, what life was like during air raids and food shortages. Despite Hitler's militaristic goals, most Germans dreaded another war. Memories of World War I, the starvation of the turnip winter, revolution, hyperinflation, and poverty still haunted the nation. Nie wieder Krieg, never again war, was everywhere. The Nazis knew this fear and presented themselves as peaceful protectors of Germany, even while preparing for conflict. When Germany invaded Poland, the propaganda ministry spun it as a defensive move, protecting German minorities and showing strength to avoid a larger war. Many Germans believed it. Britain and France declared war, seemingly confirming that Germany was simply defending itself. Unlike 1914, there were no cheering crowds, no national unity, just anxiety about reliving past horrors. Life quickly changed. Men were drafted, rationing began, blackouts were enforced, and air raid sirens sounded, even if the attacks didn't reach Berlin at first. Over time, Germans adapted. Poland fell quickly, and optimism grew that peace might be restored. Newspapers reassured citizens, Germany only wants peace, no intention to fight. Hitler publicly promised talks with Britain and France. Outside Germany, nobody believed it, but inside, people bought into the story. Germany was defending itself, and sacrifices were necessary before victory. Food and supplies were carefully managed. The Nazis stocked grains, potatoes and vegetables, subsidized agriculture, and kept people fed despite rationing. Berliners endured school closures, cold classrooms, and fuel shortages, but theaters, restaurants, and stadiums remained busy. The German national soccer team even celebrated victories bolstered by Austrian players from the Anschluss. Radio shows like Wunschkonzert kept the public entertained, broadcasting letters from soldiers and families to normalize wartime life. In May 1940, the German army launched its campaign against France. Propaganda portrayed it as a reluctant retaliation against Allied aggression. Germans feared another deadly war, but the Blitzkrieg succeeded. Paris fell in 6 weeks, France surrendered, and German cities erupted in celebration. Soldiers sent gifts home from occupied territories. French delicacies and luxury goods became common, giving civilians a taste of victory. Yet, the war's reality soon returned. Britain refused peace talks, and air raids began. By August 1940, bombs were falling on Berlin, waking citizens nightly. Children were evacuated, coal shortages worsened, and sleep became scarce. People adapted again, but the reality of a long war was undeniable. Even as Germany controlled half of Europe, rationing, air raids, and resource shortages reminded citizens that victory was not guaranteed. The invasion of the USSR in June 1941 shocked most Germans. Hitler framed it as a defensive measure against the Bolsheviks, and most citizens accepted it without question. Early successes, like the approach to Moscow, kept morale high, but by winter, reports of frost, casualties, and Soviet counterattacks undermined trust in propaganda. Goebbels launched campaigns like Winter Relief to rally civilian support, focusing on clothing, food, and helping soldiers, keeping attention away from grim realities. By 1942, sacrifices grew. Coal shortages forced Berliners to gather firewood. Rations shrank. Disease spread. Hitler plundered occupied lands to sustain the Reich. Packages from occupied France, Belgium, The Netherlands and Poland helped civilians cope, but scarcity persisted. Theatre, music, and staged plays provided diversion, though loyalty was enforced. Audiences had to stand for national and party anthems. The tide began to turn in 1943. Germany suffered major defeats at Stalingrad and in North Africa. Quiet resistance increased. Citizens refused salutes, traded jokes about Hitler, and listened to banned music. Propaganda lost its power. Goebbels' total war speech in February 1943 failed to rally the public. Meanwhile, Allied bombing campaigns intensified, destroying industrial centers and cities. Cologne lost 4,500 residents. Hamburg burned next, claiming 34,000 lives, leveling half the city and leaving nearly 1 million homeless. Survivors fled, took shelter in schools and stations, and relied on volunteers for aid. Berlin soon faced similar devastation, bringing the war to civilians' doorsteps. I felt terrible. The entire neighborhood I knew had been razed overnight. I ran without stopping until I reached Lutzowstrasse. As I passed, a building collapsed nearby. A firefighter shouted at me and others, but I could not make out his words. I dropped to the ground, hands over my head, and waited for the chaos to pass. After the war, surveys revealed that 91% of Germans considered the bombing campaigns the greatest hardship of their lives. Nights were spent in basements and bomb shelters. Daily routines became perilous, streets littered with rubble, public transit disrupted, and water, gas, and electricity often unavailable. The government tried to ease discontent with rations of cigarettes, meat, and rare coffee. In Mannheim, working citizens were even treated to wine and half a pound of veal. Jewish property was seized and redistributed. By 1944, some 18,500 rail cars of furniture, clothing, and tableware had been handed out. The home front was no longer a cliché. Teenagers and the elderly were drafted into auxiliary air force and navy units, assisting artillery batteries and searchlights. Women joined these efforts as well. The bombing campaign undermined the Nazis' reputation more than defeats at Stalingrad or Tunisia. The destruction of Cologne and Hamburg fueled anti-Nazi sentiment. Residents vandalized uniforms, hung gallows poles with Hitler's portrait, and openly criticized the treatment of Jews. Rumors of the Holocaust spread slowly. Some learned from foreign newspapers or returning veterans. Fear kept many from speaking openly. Small gestures, like colleagues offering an apple to a Jewish co-worker, carried great significance. As long as Hitler remained in power, peace was off the table. Gestapo tolerance lasted only briefly. By October 1943, Heinrich Himmler's radio broadcasts threatened execution for defeatists. Show trials followed, including that of pianist Karl Robert Creighton, who was executed at Plötzensee prison. His family received a bill for the execution. Yet fear of survival kept full-scale rebellion at bay. Civilians were preoccupied with food, shelter, and protection from air raids. Franz Rudolf von Weiss, a Swiss diplomat, described Cologne residents' mindset: profound apathy, rampant indifference, and pro-peace sentiment. Even as most Germans sought peace, day-to-day survival dominated. People fixed rooftops, melted snow to wash, and cooked meals on makeshift stoves. Heroism and solidarity often emerged. Neighbors helped one another. Propaganda adapted, portraying civilians affected by bombings as combatants, awarding posthumous medals, and fostering hope through rumors of secret weapons capable of striking London. The anti-Nazi sentiment of mid-1943 faded. The illusion of normalcy returned. Schools, bars, stores, and theaters operated. Newspapers circulated. Gifts from occupied France arrived. Soccer games and rom-coms offered temporary escape, even during air raids. By fall 1944, Germany faced total war. The Wehrmacht retreated on both fronts. Goebbels launched a full mobilization. Men drafted, women conscripted into defense factories, and civilians forced to build defenses. Hundreds of thousands dug trenches along borders, surviving on meager rations and sleeping on hay. Bombing intensified. Between 400,000 and 500,000 Germans, mostly civilians, died during 1944 and early 1945. Propaganda redirected anger toward the Allies, often blaming Jews. Civilians even killed Allied airmen who made emergency landings. Amid the chaos, Germans clung to routines as much as possible, fearing that regime change during war would bring greater disaster. When the July 20th, 1944 assassination attempt against Hitler failed, many Germans saw the plotters as traitors or fools. Fear of the Red Army and loyalty to their homeland motivated continued support for the Nazi regime. Daily life deteriorated further, rations halved, resources exhausted, and cities emptied of residents fleeing advancing armies. Refugees sought safety in rural areas, setting up vegetable gardens and scavenging for food. The bombing of Dresden in February 1945 killed 25,000, including residents like Victor Klemperer, who fled to a friend's rural home. By March, the Allies were close to Berlin. The Red Army had reached the Oder River, 80 kilometers from the capital. Civilians protested destructive orders, waving white flags and convincing local officials to surrender. Yet some clung to propaganda, convinced Hitler's birthday on April 20th would mark a turning point. Berlin suffered greatly. 100,000 residents died, 20,000 succumbed to heart attacks, and thousands committed suicide. Hitler shot himself on April 30th, 1945, and General Helmuth Weidling surrendered the city 2 days later. Soviet troops distributed food, restored utilities, and resumed streetcar services. Despite the destruction, the feared extermination of Germans did not occur. The war left Germany with a staggering human and material toll, around 13.5 million dead, including 2 to 3 million civilians, and 40% of urban buildings destroyed. Millions of refugees and displaced persons faced starvation, crime, and rebuilding challenges. Denazification was slow. Many Germans saw themselves as victims rather than participants in Nazi crimes. Only decades later, historians fully documented civilian complicity and responsibility, passing knowledge to new generations capable of critically assessing the past. Life during the bombing raids was relentless. On May 1st, 1945, Berlin went silent amid the rubble and distant gunfire. Children cried, refugees spoke of violence, and women feared for themselves and their families. Air raid shelters, improvised kitchens, black market trading, and urban gardening became daily survival strategies. Cigarettes, brandy, and food were exchanged at inflated rates. By the end, Germany had become a nation of displaced, exhausted people struggling to survive amid devastation, but also demonstrating resilience, solidarity, and adaptation in the face of overwhelming adversity.